Ah, okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Mariama.
If you want to track how long it took for him to make some of his major films, you can see roughly between 8, 9, 10 years. So, and if you compare that with the average time other filmmakers, some other major African filmmakers took to make films, it's like about 10 years. So, and this is because of funding constraints. And you know that historically, the major part of the funding for African cinema comes from Europe.
Yes, Mariama, it's true. We will always have problems of funding.
Uh-huh.
There are certain, it doesn't, having funding doesn't necessarily mean that you will make good films.
Yeah, I agree.
You know?
I agree.
You can make good films out of a shoestring budget.
Yeah, I agree.
It just takes ingenuity and it takes planning. It takes, real professional work.
Yeah, I agree.
Produce something that you would have cost somebody else maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars to do.
Yeah.
You know, that's my point. My point is, we need to up our skill. We need to really specialize. We need to build an industry. And the cinema industry isn't just the producer. You have the directors.
Yeah.
You have the camera operators. They are all individual technical sectors that demand technical knowledge, specific technical knowledge. So I work with Nollywood. You mentioned Nollywood earlier. I work with them. I go there as a judge in one of their awards, cinema awards. I know what they do. I know I have made my critics on the way they do what they do, and that is why I have been made part of what is called a new Nollywood. People who really consider all these factors I have said earlier before they bring out a film. So if you want me to recommend you to some good Nigerian film, which which is not made out of millions of dollars, but they are well done with all the technical and creative abilities attached to it.
I think what...
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mariama Khan, Ibuage, veteran filmmaker, documentarian in the Gambia, and Mariama Khan, a respectable professor at the Lehman College here in New York. Welcome to the program. As we said, this is a tribute to Sembene Ousmane, and we are live on Facebook. And wherever you are watching, welcome to this very interesting program that we hope to learn from this eminent guest that I have here. Let's begin with, who was Sembene Ousmane? We start with Ibuage.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Ibrahima, for choosing a topic on Sembene Ousmane on your forum. I am glad to say what I know about the man himself and his works. I have been a Sembene fan and a student of his works for many years now. I have watched all his movies several times over. I started watching Sembene when I was maybe 15 years old at Rit Cinema in Banjul. Khala, Manda were the films that I watched as a child. And it was a moment for me to know the first African film producer on that big screen, because all the other films I have been watching there were cowboy films, Indian films, and Western gangster films. Until the cinema showed Khala. and I went to see it. And afterwards, I saw it several times over. So the man we are discussing here is a phenomenon. He was Africa's first film producer who taught himself to read and write French because he slapped his teacher at the age of 7 and had to leave school after having started as a fisherman in Ziguinchor, where he was born. So Sembene made his life. He ended up enlisting in the French army in 1939, fought in the Second World War, and later lived in Marseille in France, where he was a dock worker. That's why his first work was black docker. So Sembene went on to produce and make other films. And then at some point, just like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he decided to make his films in Wolof. If the French want to understand it, let them read the subtitling. But I am making films for my people. And it was Manda he started with, because God's Bits of Woods, which was one of his first films, The Bout de Bois de Dieu, was in French. So he was a revolutionary. He was making films that always had social dimension to them, strong social dimensions, some political. And one of his films was even banned in Senegal. But Sembene went on to make films until his 80s, when he died in Senegal. So to start with, this is what I can say about the man.
Mariama Khan, not many Gambians have been hearing about you. You hear a professor at the Lehman College here in New York. Can you tell us a little bit about the man?
As a scholar who studies Sembene Ousmane and teaches his work, I see Sembene not only as a pioneer of African filmmaker and rightly the father of African cinema, but a pioneer who was able to reliably predict the future concerns of the African state, post-colonial African state. If you look at Ibu just shared the interesting life experiences of the man. For me, what Ibu has just said comes to one key theme that I see as a foundational theme in all of Sembene's work, and that is the idea of adventure. If you look at his own life, Sembene was an adventure. Like Ibu has rightly said, he went to school, a very controversial student who ended up slapping, according to some records, his teacher or the principal. You see, depending on what records you consult, they would mention it was the principal, others say it was the teacher. But whatever the case, the act of slapping your teacher from someone who was born and raised in Senegal, that's very unusual. Because in Senegalese society, just like in Gambian society, we respect our teachers so much. So you can see what the adventure in him at that early stage. If you look at the types of jobs he has done, which led him to his interests in writing, in creative writing, and later in film, you can see that he was a dock worker, he was a fisherman, he was a mason, he was a unionist, he was so many other things, and I would say a social rebel. So if you look at each of these things, Sembene did something that the ordinary Senegalese would do, or the ordinary Senegambian would do. And for me, the other thing I find very interesting is how he made just one film, but out of it, he made many more. And I'm saying Sembene Ousmane made just one film. For me, that's like Black Girl. So
Black
all,
Girl. Yeah.
Yeah.
Black Guy was the first that won an award, actually.
Exactly.
Festival.
Exactly. So for me, all his other films were structured around Black Girl. And using Black Girl as the foundational idea of Sembene's philosophies in life. Being a man who had a serious problem with colonial rule, colonial domination, and also racism, we see how he would later transform those concerns and adapt them to the concerns of the post-colonial state. So you can see he was making some kind of adventure with his artistic inspirations. He started with denouncing colonial domination and racism. And we see him do that powerfully in Black Girl. Then later he transitioned to talk about his post-colonial concerns, or the post-colonial concerns of the Senegalese state, and of course, we can say the all African post-colonial states.
And let me remind you about Kancharoy.
Yeah, Kamde Charo.
It's one of those post-colonial issues that he made films out of. But you really making very good
points. Yeah, yeah.
I love listening to him.
In later films after Black Girl, he made the other film we can look at, which also shows us some of his the adventure in relation to the development of his artistic career. We see him engage with the problems of the post-colonial state. In particular, he shows us he denounces the corruption of the post-colonial African states and the political corruption of the states, which is very prominent in Hala.
Yes,
so
yes.
Later,
Hala actually, even though he had some very strong views about post-colonial issues in Senegal, also looked at some issues that Senegalese culture was trying to manage, things like Islam and Muslim and Christianity. The Gelawar is about that, how a Muslim body was buried in a
Christian grave,
and the Muslims come to collect and the Christians come to collect the body and all that. But the film also is intertwined.
So I think that's the time.
Yes, that's Gelawar, which was intertwined with food aid, giving food aid to countries. You could clearly see in Gelawar that he was trying to project a rejection of food aid to the sense that he lost, the character played by Gelawar lost his life, and then these are issues for Sembene. There are so many, he's multidimensional in terms of social issues that he looked at.
Okay, Mr. Wage, let's look at this from this point. What informed Sembene's artistic skills, that became until he became the genius he actually was? Remember, you said earlier that he didn't go to school. He went to school and it was a dropout, and then he didn't go to a proper college. He didn't. So yeah. So why? How did he become that renowned African until he became known as the father of African cinema?
Determination.
For me, it comes.
Go on.
For me, it comes to this idea of adventurism, which is very central in Sembene's works. Because adventurism, Sembene was a promoter of African culture, and he was interested in reclaiming the African self-image. And his work were deeply informed by African cultural ideas. For example, if you look at him, there are what pushed him from where he started as almost an illiterate person, because he just finished elementary school and never made it through to high school, much more to university, to college. But what we see in him is that he has certain attributes, and you can see he would engage with why these attributes are important, they are lacking or not lacking in each of his characters, in almost all of his films. Certain attributes which are necessary for success in human life. And again, the recognition that human adventurism is integral to human life. And because adventurism involves some risk, you need to be one, you need to have the courage. We saw that Sembene in his personal life, he had courage. Because a child that would go and slap the teacher does really have some courage. We'll agree to that. But courage also involves risk, just like adventure involves risk. So it's not only enough to have courage. You also have to have knowledge in order to be successful in your adventure. If you look at Sembene, he's been seeking knowledge, whether formally or informally. We know he was someone who was raised by his grandmothers, both the paternal and maternal grandmothers. And coming from a similar cultural background like Sembene Ousmane, we know that the grandmothers and the grandfathers, they do teach their grandchildren certain skills. In this context, we can talk about nite in Wolof, nite. They will socialize you to have nite, to be human,
to be human.
Yeah. But not only human, to have certain human attributes that are necessary for successful integration into society. Absolutely. We also, a similar concept is hakilima in Mandinka. When they say hakilimalem, like someone who has been socialized in a certain way that he has a balanced personality and he or she can engage in any parts of society. So we see that Sembene was prepared to be knowledgeable from that early stage. But out of his convictions, personal convictions, we see him move from his circumstances in Senegal to go and study filmmaking in Russia. Yeah. So the knowledge is not only important. Like having knowledge and courage is not the end and be all. You also need what we call wisdom. Because wisdom guides you to be able to engage, to determine how much risk you should take or how less risk you should not take. And in addition to that, purpose. We see him, he had purpose in his life. And we see how he recreates those attributes in each of his characters. And this is why I'm saying, if you look at Joanna in Black Girl, Joanna is a character that features in every film Sembene made. Yeah. How does he do that? He does that, just like all of his characters, by either recreating a replica of Joanna, and in this case, we see that in Fatou Kiné, in the film Fatou Kiné, and we see that another replica in Kole, in Molade. But the difference between Fatou Kiné, Kole, and Joanna is that Fatou Kiné was mature, Kole was mature, but Joanna was very childish, that she could take the kinds of risks she did and end up failing because she was not prepared enough. She was still growing. So at such a period when she should still be nurtured to expand her horizon, her ability, her comportment, and her understanding of things, she was pushed into the world. So with fatal consequences. We see the Joanna character, how Sembene uses Joanna to predict our post-colonial concerns as people from the Gambia and Senegal. In the way we have this Bagwe syndrome. You understand the Bagwe syndrome? When we have our young kids, sometimes very, very young as 12 and 13 or 14 years, going through the Sahara Desert, then through the Mediterranean to go to Spain or Italy. And we've seen the national tragedies that this had resulted in. We see how many people died, very young people. So you can see, using Joanna, he had created replicas of the character through different stages of development.
Can I ask you a question, please, Maria? Where do you place passion in all this?
Passion is very central, because passion is what drives you on when even everything seems to fail. And we see that Sembene had the passion to not settle down with his circumstances, his half-baked education, but to say, I'm going to push on. And passion has led him. He did not settle down with writing in French. He said, okay, and this is also part of his adventurism. He started writing novels and then said, okay, the novels, they are not really getting me to my purpose. Huh? They're good, but like not many people will read them. Now I'm going to switch to film. And passion also gave him the stamina to say, okay, French is the national language of Senegal and most Francophone African countries, but French is not enough. French is like giving up my cause to another cultural system. I'm going to use Wolof. When I use Wolof, everybody in Senegal, basically, because Wolof is the lingua franca in Senegal, majority of the people can know what the types of film I'm making and what my films are about. So you see, passion is like the stamina, it's like the pump you need to get you going. And we even see the same passion in his characters. Let's say Gelwar. How Gelwar becomes a very adventurous character. We see Gelwar as someone who is like the voice of the people. But also, Sembene creates this character to show us his weaknesses, his failures as a human being. We know that Gelwar is the philanderer. He was following the assistant imam's wife. You know, for someone who is a moral authority in society, you are not expected to do that kind of thing. But also, okay, carry on, Ibu.
Yes, I was going to say, okay, Ibrahim.
Well, I had a question for you, Mr. Wage. Mariam, thank you for your thorough analysis of Sembene, the man, and his philosophy, and how passionate he was about filmmaking, and now how he was even named father of African cinema. Now, Mr. Wage, my question to you will be about his early films. The most notable among them for me was Borom Saret in 1963. And then it was premiered here in New York some years after that, I think 1968, so 1968 or 69, or thereabout. Yes, so let's talk about Borom Saret.
Thank you. Actually, Sembene made films about Africa whilst living in France. So Sembene was the filmmaker in whose films you will see actual African locations, because he shot his films on location. He comes to Senegal with all the equipment, not to talk of the fact that Sembene was shooting on celluloid, not on video. He was shooting on a very expensive material for filmmaking. So he used very sophisticated equipment. He had, as Mariama said, he had the purpose, he had the passion, he had the knowledge, and he had the African traditional knowledge from which he can make millions of films. He said it. He said, everywhere you look at in Africa, you can make a film out of. That's why what is more important for me is to see what we can learn from the films that Sembene has made and compare them to what we're experiencing today and how we can draw some lessons from those films. So instead of talking about Borom Saret, I would rather talk about the significance of, not that it's not significant. Each of Sembene's films is completely independent of the other.
No, the reason is that is the first major film that he actually shot in Africa. Yeah.
Yes, yes. That's why I said when he made that film, he came to Africa and made the film with mostly a white crew. Mostly white crew. In fact, it was all white crew. French crew that came with him, camera operations, sound technicians, sound engineers. They were all, because if you look at the credits at the end of the film, you'll see more than 50 names. All of those played some role in making those films. It was an early film, but Sembene did not make it like a cheap film. He made it the same way as the Europeans were making their films, using celluloid. So that is what stands out for me. The subject matter of the film is something else, but the fact that it is the first film made in Africa at that technical level is significant. For me, Borom Saret is significant. But I would like to make reference to Gelawar simply because of the syndrome of food aid that is still with us in Africa. Until now, you can count every year tons and tons of food aid that comes to our countries in Africa. This was a subject that Sembene addressed in when was that film made? Maybe 1978 or early 80s. He made that film more than 40 years ago. And still, up to now, we're still receiving food aid.
And the concept of yellow one.
Yes, Gelawar. That was the concept, because it was this guy who came to a meeting organized by the politicians, and he criticized the food aid because it was food aid that was given to the village, and they had a gathering, and they were there to thank the politician who brought the food aid. But Gelawar came on the stand, and he criticized the food aid. That was where he says one finger points at something to you. 5 fingers is begging. He said this at that meeting, and he addressed the issue and seriously telling the officials who were there that they ñàkk a jom. That was the theme. That's the Sembene I want to discuss. That's the Sembene who should have effect on us today. He made that film 40 years ago. Go and watch it. Go and watch that film. It's one of the most significant films Sembene has made. All the other ones are classical, and they deal with social issues. But that one dealt with socio-economic issues that we are living with today. It's a shame.
The concept of begging.
The concept of food aid coming into our countries. Rice from the Chinese. The concept of food aid. They can give you any other aid, but food aid, nobody should give you what you should eat. Nobody should give it to you. It's the most shameful condition that anyone can be. Any people can be. I went to India in 1991. And the first thing they told me in my class was, not a grain of rice comes to India as food aid. In 1991, India is 1 billion people. I said to my lecturer, we are less than 1 million people. If we don't have food aid, we die. If India can do it, until now, not a grain of rice or whatever comes to India as food aid. They feed themselves. And if you go to India, to any restaurant, they serve you rice and dal. The dal is the sauce and the rice. You eat until your rice finishes, you call the waiter, he gives you more rice. Not more dal, but more rice. For us, 1.5 million people, if you don't get food, aid, rice, we die. Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So filmmakers like us should project these things to the people. That's what Sembene wanted. That's why Sembene made films. He wanted his films on the social life of people.
So, Mr. Wage, more to your point, maybe this one is for Mariama Khan. And thank you, Mr. Wage, for bringing in that element of begging, which in Wolof, he later termed as yellow one. You know,
Yellow one.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Exactly.
Sembene, in one of his highly notable words that he said was, his philosophy was, if Africans do not tell their own stories, Africa will soon disappear. What does that translate to you?
For me, that means that, you know, the way I see it is, if the goat and the lion went before a magistrate, the lion story would be, well, I was sitting and the goat came and poked me. I said, Mr. Goat, please stop, don't do that. He said, no, I won't stop, and he kicked me. And he said, oh, Mr. Goat, then he put his hoof in my eye. Then I just slapped him and he fell and he died and I ate it. So he will give you a story. That's why in colonialism, in slavery, I am very angry when I hear them say that our grandfathers, those of us who live in Africa now, sold the grandfathers of the slaves who went to America. They said we were selling them slaves. The kings were selling them slaves. That's what the white slave masters said. But that's wrong. That's not correct. That's a lie. But that's them telling the history. You see my point? It's them telling the history of slavery. So they make it look like we were selling them slaves. Not that they were coming here, capturing us and taking us away to America. And that's what happened. They came here, captured us, and took us to America. That's the story. But that's not the way that they are telling it.
So just to come in, if you look at, Sembene had a mission with his filmmaking. He saw film as a political act. And therefore his films had a political mission.
Mm-hmm.
And what gave that direction to his film is partly the colonial experience. Filmmaking during the colonial period was entrenched colonial propaganda in Africa. It showed Africans as less than human. It showed Africans and Africa as a place that had no history and no culture. So it made certain films that were highly derogatory to the African personality and to the African continent. So when filmmaking started, and by saying when filmmaking started, I mean when independent filmmaking started in Africa, which means now Africans themselves have the opportunity to make films. And for the Francophone countries, you had the Laval Decree in 1934, Laval Decree, which made it illegal for Africans to make their own films unless they get authorization from the French colonial state. So we see that after weathering all those restrictions, then came independence. The most sensible thing to do was to push back on those ideas. And Sembene and the first generation African filmmakers took up that task to push back, to demystify some of the colonial representation of the African person and the African continent. So we see in Gelwa, and again, this comes to how Sembene's film career has evolved over time. We can see that the early films generally were more interested in denouncing colonial rule, and racism. But later, at the end of colonial rule, he changed his strategy to talk about the post-colonial state. And this is where Gelwar and Hala and a few other films come in. In Gelwar, we see him explore the failures of the post-colonial African state. And in trying to explore that failure, he brings on board different sub-themes. The moral bankruptcy of the Senegalese state or the Senegalese people at that time. Because this is why he would create an imperfect character like Gelwar to be the main character of that film, who is there as a source of hope, a symbol of hope, but also who is there as a very human person, very imperfect character. We know certain things that Gelwar did were not okay in traditional society. We also see him reinforce the other good sides of the Senegalese people. How does he do that? He uses Gora, the police officer in Gelwar, who becomes a symbol of trust, a symbol of professionalism, and a symbol of unity. He also uses some religious heads in that, because in Gelwar, the religious conflict is a significant theme in that film. We can see how, due to personal interests, people use religion to foster conflicts or to instigate conflicts that were not initially there. It's just like Chedo. In Chedo, we see the same thing. When in Gelwar, coming back to Gelwar, where, like in Islam, okay, I don't want to go into the religious aspects, given that I'm not an Islamic scholar, an Islamic scholar, so I'm just making some very broad comments that are not based on my Islamic knowledge. I'm not an Islamic scholar. So we know that from what the Imam said in Gelwar, Islam makes it possible, being a very just religion, if there is uncertainty about anything, and also a knowledge-oriented religion, they still need to dig the body out and then ascertain who the body was, and then give it the appropriate burial. So we see that also in Catholicism, in Christianity, from the father in the film, the Abbé, we see that that's also acceptable in Christianity. But we see some of the followers in those religions trying to do otherwise, because in particular, the deceased family had a vested interest in this. They saw it as a means of like some kind of sacrilege on the death. But you see that, for example, Morsis insists that his brother, they cannot, no one can dig out his grave, because it was a big dishonor. But we see that Morsis himself was not an honorable man, because we see him sleep with his brother's wife, and he conceives a child with his brother's wife. So you can see the moral bankruptcy. And another film we can look at, talking about the experiences of the post-colonial state, or citizens under the post-colonial state, we can talk about Hala. When the Senegalese replaced the French, what they first claimed to be was the citizens, the sons of the people are now leading the people. But the first things we see them is, in fact, they become acculturated. In the first state, when they were fighting to have power, we see them all wear traditional clothes, because then they want to associate with the people. But as soon as they got the power, then something very different came to their minds. Look at them in the first scenes of the film. Instead of talking about the things that matter to the Senegalese population, they're talking about marrying a third wife, not even a second one. And after that, what happens? They thought they were, the film became, everybody was preoccupied by his impotence. And that impotence is very symbolic of what happened to the post-colonial state when Africans took over leadership.
Yeah, Mariama, when you're talking about Gelua, and you're talking about Hala, you talk about Kande Charo, I see some interconnectedness in terms of the themes that, you know, like you said earlier, how Sembene builds on his characters and how he developed the plot, you know. So, I mean, haven't you seen the interconnectedness between the film that Mariama talked about, to the Kande Charo, where, you know, at some point, like you said, Mariama, at some point, Gelua was banned by Senghor in Senegal.
Well, apparently, the themes weave into each other, and they are all, what is common among them is the fact that they are all socio-economic issues that Senegal was dealing with, whether it's religious issues or whether it's cultural in terms of Hala, and or whether it's our animist past, whether it's the colonial, post-colonial government. He had a mission, and what he was doing was to bring out the issues, our socio-economic issues that were maybe for some reason or the other affecting the relationship or not affecting it at all. In the case of between the Muslims and the Christians in Senegal, as you know, shown in Gerawar at the graveyard. So what Sembene does is, as Mariama was focusing on some of the immoral acts of the main character, you know, there are certain things that elements have to be in a film. If you're doing a proper, well-scripted film, it has to have the element of love of some sort. It has to have the element of comedy of some sort. It has to have the element of surprise of some sort. And it has to have the element of twist. When the viewer is watching the film, when Gelawat appears, he thinks he's a larger than life figure. And then he brings him down to a fornicator. So these are extremes that are essential in filmmaking. So Sembene,
I think
yes, go on.
I agree with you, because as an artist, Sembene is no extraordinary artist for that matter. He must develop a thoroughly rounded character, a very human character. Because as you know, and as we always say, the human person is imperfect, has a lot of imperfections. And,
you know, Sembene, at that, you know, all those themes, what those themes have in common is Sembene holding a mirror to Senegal. Each of his films is a reflection of what is happening in Senegalese culture. Whether it's Kanacharoy, where some women went into a hut and set themselves on fire, or whether it's he looks at things that are Senegalese and it's like a mirror. He just puts a mirror in front of Senegal and makes a film. Hala, about Hala.
What about Molade? You know, about female genital cutting or FGM. We
Exactly.
tend to forget.
That was the film that was actually banned in
Senegal. So one cannot say you only. Yes.
And you know, the film was banned in Senegal when Senegal had a president who was a lover of arts.
Catholic.
President Senghor, Leopold Sedar Senghor.
Yeah.
The film was banned. Whether it was during Senghor or whether it was before independence, I'm not too sure.
No, Molade is one of the more recent films which came in 2004. This was the last film he created.
Before he died.
Yeah, before he passed away.
Yeah.
Simply because the subject matter was very sensitive to Senegal. And the subject matter is still sensitive everywhere. But Sembene took it on. He took it on, just like he took on Hala. He took on the circumcision issue. So these are cultural and, you know, and very basic cultural practices, which may have fault, and it depends on the viewer. He makes the film and lets you decide. That's what a good filmmaker does. He makes you a film and lets you decide, you the viewer. So for me, this is what binds all his films together, the mirror to Senegal.
I think in addition to what Ibu said, what we see in his films, and again, starting from the first films he made, we see his ideology and his political concerns as an artist and a filmmaker evolve. We see in the initial films like Black Girl and of course Borom Saret, he is concerned with the colonial state, colonial legacy, the effects of colonial domination. Then he moves on from that to the post-colonial state to talk about neo-colonialism. And we see that in Hala, in Gelwar, and also each of these films has some other major themes they deal with. Then he moves to social and cultural issues, cultural concerns, which show the decadence, the immorality in Senegalese state. And he uses different characters and different storylines to project that. Then, a theme that started from the beginning with Black Girl, we see Joanna as a daring woman who has all that it takes to pursue her dreams and her ambitions. But unfortunately, due to certain circumstances, she became a victim of circumstances. But we see him continue the projection of the African woman, which for me makes Sembene the filmmaker for African women.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, it is. There's another thing I want us to look at. You know, the current system where Gambians and Africans in the diaspora send money to their parents and keep them living in Africa has been a subject that Sembene addressed in Manda. Now, okay. Walaikum salam. I'm sorry. Alhamdulillah.
Maybe Ibu, you can mute your speaker. You can mute your speaker.
After a while.
Okay.
So, you know, Manda is the issue of reparations, or not reparations, but money sent from exactly, remittances. So he dealt in a way that showed the fact that families in Senegal, some families in Senegal were kept alive by people working abroad. But people working abroad had their problems. And the problem of sending money at the time, what is called money order from Senegal, was very cumbersome. It took time, you know, and this guy was called and told that he was sent some money. Okay? It takes a while before the money arrives, but the guy had already spent the money before the money arrived. He went everywhere, promising everyone, you know, he didn't even know how much he was going to receive. So that reflects the current trend where people here in Africa are virtually kept alive by people abroad. You know?
This is what I said. This is why I said this further reinforces my statement that one of the greatest thing about Sembene Ousmane was his ability to accurately predict the future constants of the post-colonial state. If you look at the issue of remittances, it was in fact an issue in his first films. And in one of his first films, and for me, that's where all the orders built. That's on which all the orders films were built. No, Black Girl. If you remember in Black Girl, when Joanna was in France, the mom, Mouche read a letter to her, And the mother was saying, what are you doing with your salary, with your pay? You are not supporting me. And you are not supporting me. I'm here, I'm in poverty, I'm sick, what are you doing? So you can see that issue of remittance. So we see Sembene use that initial character to show some future concerns of the African people or the Senegalese people specifically. We see in Mandabi when Ibrahim Jenks' niece in France sends him a money order for him to take some, then save some, just like most immigrants would do nowadays. And in Gelwar, we see a twist to the story when Bartolomeo, who has been acculturated and taken away from his culture, like he was in France, not supporting the family,
Exactly.
doing what he was doing. And again, we see the film in Molade when Ibrahim, the son of Dukure, when Ibrahim Dukure returns to Jeresu, in the village Jeresu. And we know that from other characters, we know that he was supporting the village. He built a hand pump water system for the women. We know that he was supporting the family. And we see him in the film paying the debts of his father, the Dukutige. And we also see him paying the debts of his fiancée. So you can see how the films which started in Black Girl are being explored in different films with their different facets. So, and again, this reinforces my claim that, in fact, Sembene just made one film. And out of it, he made many more.
Many others. Yes. So let's talk about this issue of Sembene, his philosophy or his political the political background that actually shaped him. If you look at the production house that he called Gallecheto, the house of the rebel. So I mean, to you, the filmmaker, a renowned Gambian filmmaker, and Mariama Khan, a professor of film studies at the university here in New York, what does that actually tell you about the man? Because here was a guy who was educated, you call it half-baked education. He spent some time in France. He went to Russia at some point, but he was not subservient to the powers that be, like in the West or maybe the Senegalese government. But he was talking about issues that ordinarily a lot of people would want to, like, say, the elephant in the room. We wouldn't want to talk about them.
Actually, Sembene's experience with colonialism was when he enlisted in the French army in 1939. He went on to fight. He went on to serve the French army until 1945 when the war ended. And he went into dock working in Marseille. He was a dock worker. That's why one of his first films is called Black Docker. So he was making films out of experience that he found. And then Black Girl was a reflection of what a maid who was working for a French family was like. Just like our Mbindan, what we call Mbindan now. This was the life of a Mbindan, of a colonial master. So he looked around, and what he saw is what he made film out of in the beginning. So his political outlook was shaped by issues that center around people's lives, their freedom, their circumstances, and the experiences that they go through. Just like Mariama said, he was an adventurer. He would look at issues and say, oh, that is something that I can make film out of. And he does. So for me, he has a larger than life figure when it comes to production, direction, and camera operation of films. You can see in his films how technical and creative abilities come together in the casting, as well as the location, in the sound engineering, in the camera operation, in the angles, in the depths. So these are all things that Sembene took seriously. For me, those are things that I am learning from and using in my skill. So for me, Sembene is directly benefiting his life and his methods. Knowing it is directly benefiting me in my work.
Okay, moving on to the last point of the discussion. What next after Sembene? Wage, you are a renowned filmmaker. You work at GRT for several years. You inspired some of us. You did some fantastic documentaries. Mariama Khan, you are a writer in the Gambia. Like Sembene, you've decided to move into another career, that is into filmmaking, doing documentaries. There's a lot of things that we are supposed to do. There's one more issue that I want us to look at finally before we close the lid on this program is the issue of the production ability and the funding of Sembene's films. Remember, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Most of the time, people can have fantastic ideas to do documentaries, but unfortunately, documentaries are very expensive. You know, to produce a good documentary, even if it is for 10 minutes, is expensive. You know, the kind of effort or work that goes into these things, cameras themselves are expensive. You know, so Sembene, I understand from the documentary prepared by Professor Samagajigo called Sembene, which is on YouTube, but it's on sale, is that Sembene at some point was mortgaging his properties in Senegal. It was a problem for him even to get funding at times because these are documentaries that it's not like nowadays when you can think about democracy and then UNDP. So you don't get to cite examples of organizations and they say WHO will fund this. Of course, WHO will not fund something that is about anti-WHO. But Sembene was not the guy who was taking funds from these people. Let's talk about that dimension too. I mean, as we close the last issue on this program.
Maria, we're going.
Thank you, Ibu. So you see that to maintain creative freedom in a work of art demands certain things. And obviously, as you said, he who pays the piper
calls the tune.
Yeah. So you don't expect someone to fund you. And this has been some of the problems that early filmmakers have had under FEPASI and FESPACO about the relationship between African film and Europe. And this also includes America. Because when African films were produced in Africa, there was a very thin distribution infrastructure, just like very scarce funding avenues for such films. So what do you do in order for your film to be to reach a bigger audience? You have to depend on the structures that for Sembene symbolize colonial rule and colonial domination and neo-colonial control in order to be able to have a bigger outreach for your film. So consequently, what happens is that you either play by the rules or you are shut out for majority of filmmakers. So what this has translated into for contemporary African filmmakers is that our contemporary filmmakers, especially if you look at Nollywood, people no longer, there are political agendas in their films. Like for me, I see a political agenda in every film. And I feel if I watch any film, I can show you what's the political agenda in it, whether it's communicated directly or indirectly. So what modern African filmmakers, contemporary African filmmakers, most of them, what they've decided to do is to move away from that mission-oriented filmmaking. To
Yes.
make films that resonate, that have a global agenda, that deal with local issues, but also universal concerns. We see Jean-Pierre Becalo, the Cameroonian filmmaker, do exactly that. We see Nollywood do exactly that. Most of the Nollywood film production, sometimes they in fact reinforce the colonial stereotypes of the African in order to sell their films. So that becomes a marketing strategy. So what we're seeing now is a new dimension and a new purpose to African filmmaking.
When it comes to funding, for me, it's all about being ingenious as a filmmaker. You know, at the time Sembene made films, there were not many demands for African filmmaking. So Sembene had the monopoly of getting French-based foundations to fund his films. And he found it. Okay? Now, what Sembene did was to find funding and make a film free from placements. Okay? In Nollywood, it's a different scenario. There are multinational companies and some companies in Nigeria who would be prepared to fund a film if you promote their products in the film. So that's what is called placement, like beer, get your characters to drink certain beer.
Real estate companies also.
Exactly. So this is how they get the funding. So it's about ingenuity. You know, people don't discuss funding anymore. My problem in Africa is not the funding, to be honest with you. My problem about African filmmaking, and I've said this everywhere in every forum I have been, and I am part of 3 or 4 forums in Africa. And in every forum I have been, I have said that what we need to improve in our filmmaking is the quality. It's the quality of the technical and creative quality in terms of casting, in terms of cinematography, in terms of editing, in terms of sound engineering, in terms of costume. So these are things that have to improve in our filmmaking. Purposefulness. And the film has to have the elements that will make the viewer feel glued. Because I am a judge at the African Magic Viewers Choice Award. I go every year to judge films, African films that are submitted for the award. I look at 300 to 400 films in 10 days. And I judge them in terms of technical and creative abilities. And then I look at the twisting, the dimensions, the suspense, the comedy, like all the things I have said earlier. They have to be there. These are elements. So most of them don't have it. And if you tell them, they say, oh, it makes the budget bigger. I said, the budget should be big. Or don't make the film. Sometimes they have a big budget, but they do it wrongly. They put, like we always say, they want to fool us as judges. They make a very, very flamboyant intro. The moment you start the film, what you see is something they pick up from some Hollywood beginning. Or they spend a lot of money getting someone to do that for them. But when the film starts and it moves, sometimes I don't have to go beyond 5 minutes. And I can tell you what the film is good or bad, or it's worth my effort to watch the rest of it.
I think if you can just let me come in here. What you said is very true, especially with Nollywood films. They have very simple storylines, majority of them. You just watch the first part, you can conclude where the story is going to end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, that defeats their creativity.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the crafting that needs to be done in a film so that the viewer can. If you watch a Hollywood film, it's filled with suspense. You don't know what's going to happen next. And that's what film is about. That's what it should be about. Like Mariama said, I opened the first 3 to 2 minutes of the film, and I know that the guy is going to marry this woman.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's about what we do, not how much money we have to do it. It's about how we do what we do. I take part in African cinema debates, and these are things that and that's why I am part of what is called a new Nollywood. And new Nollywood has started producing films that stand out. Things like September 1, which is about a coup d'etat in Nigeria in 1961 or something. No, 1976. And the film was made so well because I judged that film, and the film was so well done. The backdrop, everything was 76. The costume was 76. The record players were 76. The house decor was 76. The music they were playing was 76. That's what is called period films. You see a Nigerian period film, and you can point at something that's not in that period. That's not right. We have to do it well. So Nigerians have started doing it well in new Nollywood. Yeah. But the vast majority of the productions that are done out of Nigeria lack all these things I have just mentioned.
Well, Mr. Wage, I agree with you and Mariama about the issue of the basic concept or settings of the Nigerian filmmaking industry. But one thing that we must also point out is that they are ahead of us when it comes to the movie industry. What has happened to the Gambia? We're now talking about the legacy of Sembene Ousmane. We see Senegal, we copy a lot, or we tend to learn a lot from Senegal. But what has happened to our fledgling film industry?
I think Balde, due to the fact that we are from the Gambia, we have the privilege of taking ownership of Sembene Ousmane because of the Senegambian spirit. So in fact, Sembene Ousmane is part of us. He's our filmmaker in many respects. But when it comes to the development of the film industry in the Gambia, I think that's a different issue here. Like first, if you study how film production, like independent filmmaking evolved in Nigeria, you can realize that there was a direct state intervention and a policy, state policy,
exactly,
which was geared to promoting film production.
Exactly.
You realize, I think, on the Gowon, when there was this big push to promote Nigerian film production in the country through the nationalization of the theaters that were there at the time. And since that started, there were so many other interventions that were done or implemented in order to get Nollywood to where it is now. But in the Gambia, we see that one of our best filmmakers and some of our best filmmakers, and we don't generally talk about nowadays, include Ibrahim Sanyang.
Yeah.
Ibrahim Sanyang, he passed away now. Ibrahim Sanyang was a genius in all respects. Think of the creative skills. Think of the technical skills. Like everything you can think of, he was a genius. And in fact, he made a documentary which won an award, like water, a documentary on water. And so looking at the state investment in filmmaking in the Gambia.
That's where I want to come in. Both in Senegal and Nigeria, the state gives money to filmmakers. In Nigeria, every year, more than $1 billion is given to Nollywood. Because the Nigerian government, in about 6-7 years ago, realized that Nigerian films were more of an export of the Nigerian culture than oil. Became more important to Nigeria than oil. So the government said, let's invest in Nollywood. And that's why they invested in Nollywood. And then they realized that Nollywood was churning out quantity of films that lacked quality. So Nigerians who were abroad and Nigerians in Nigeria who had the skill came together and started making films that were world standard. So there are not many, there should not be many, but that is what it takes. In the Gambia, the mere fact that films are not part of our culture, to be very frank.
Ibu, I'll disagree with you on that.
Excuse me, I'm coming.
Films have always been part of our culture.
I'm coming. Mariama, I have been an aficionado of cinema since I was 8 years old. I was, in the 60s and 70s. If you haven't gone to Odeon Cinema and to Rich Cinema, Star Cinema, and Roxy Cinema in Serekunda, it is packed every day because that was the time before television came into being. When television came into being, the cinema industry in Gambia, the cinema, what I mean cinema, but was the cinema studio showing grounds that we had here, they all closed. So those who were born in the past 20 years have never actually sat before a big screen, a silver screen, what they call a silver screen. So the culture of watching cinema, not to talk of made by us, but made by somebody else, died with Banjul Cinema. So the government itself, through its Ministry of Culture at the NCAC, have not over the years made cinema, filmmaking, an important part of their work, so that they can tell government that you need to do this and this and this to help the country become a cinema-making country. It doesn't happen overnight. We have people born here who may have been born with the skills, natural skills. Cinema making, creativity is not something you learn, and creativity in cinema making is central. In filmmaking, creativity is central, then passion. Everything else comes after. So we have people who are creative, but we have no way of making a film. The way I say always, what I say always is, if you have skills in writing a book, all you need is a pen and a paper. But if you have skills in making a film, you need first the camera and a storyline, and then you need to have, after you film it, you take the footage and edit it, and then come out with a result. All that takes money and skills as well. More skills than just writing. So if you don't get any assistance, I made my first films because I was at GRTS. I had all these things available to me, the camera, the editing and all that. So I learned how to do all of them. So that's not everybody. So for someone to be a filmmaker, you have to have those two. That's the passion first, then you have to come out and have this equipment to do something. So what we need to say in Gambia is not, oh, we don't have film, we don't. No, let's not criticize ourselves. Let's know where we stand. Where we stand is the fact that cinema making has to be helped by the government, by the state. It has to be taught in schools. It has to have central part of our education system, just like it is in Senegal and in Nigeria.
Okay.
So let's know what we don't have, and before we start criticizing ourselves.
Okay, well, on that note, Mariama and Mr. Wage, let me just make a final quotation on Samuel Ousmane in an interview he had with Saja Nyang and Samba Gajigo. That was after the Burkina Faso Film Festival in 1995. He said that his last word, My wish is that young African filmmakers assume their social responsibilities, that they become the voices of their people, of their time, and there might be a spirit of competitiveness among them. Finally, what is your take on this as we wrap up this program? Mariama?
I think I'm going to say that if you look at, like first, acknowledge the kind of efforts that are being made in the Gambia. Because you always have to start from somewhere and build on that to get to the ideal place you hope to be at. So already we have a number of filmmakers who are doing their best. And Ibu has been one of the doyens of filmmaking in the Gambia. So when it comes to making films that matter, making films that would be like Sembene Ousmane's films, that are films that are timeless, because good art is always timeless. So they can resonate with different generations. We really need to, as Ibu rightly said, we need the skills. We need to get educated on the on filmmaking as a craft, but also filmmaking as an entrepreneurial endeavor. So, and one of the key things, one of the key requirements we need is there should be a policy to promote filmmaking in the Gambia. There should be a national policy that has committed funds to promote filmmaking in the country. There also needs to be a cinematographic infrastructure in the country. And this includes having the schools, having the production platforms, the distribution platforms, and all other things that are required to make this a successful venture. So when it comes to competition, I think storytelling is very important in filmmaking. Because most of the films, as someone who teaches film, including Sembene's films, I can look at certain films and just say this film was a copied someone else's work. Whether it's in the way the story has been crafted or in the way certain scenes are being presented. So creativity, the essence of creativity is originality. So we have to be able to produce films that are original. And the only way we can do that is when our craft, when our art comes from the heart. So for me, when it comes to competitiveness, we all agree that there's no disagreement. We all agree that Sembene made films that are global standards, even though majority of them are subtitled, had to be subtitled in a global language, either French or English, Portuguese, Spanish. But irrespective of the primary languages being Wolof, we see that it resonates with different cultures, with different societies. So unless our ambition becomes creating or producing those kinds of films, we may really struggle with competitiveness.
Yes, actually, yeah.
Okay, finally, Mr. Wage, your final word.
Well, my final word on this matter is that I hope that something comes out of this program in terms of raising the awareness of not just Sembene, but about the significance of filmmaking in telling our stories. You know, the best way you can tell your story is by using audiovisual, because audiovisual cuts across language, because you're dealing with body language. If you make a film, you can make a silent film without any dialogue in it, just actions, and you show it to somebody in Fatoto. He understands it the way as somebody in Paris would understand it. Because that's what cinema is. That's what I always tell students of film, that audiovisual, the visual part of the audio has to come out without being explained by the audio part. They complement each other. Sometimes just the action of something on the screen to the viewer can tell a better story than if you even add your commentary. So know when to add your commentary, know where to just show the action to tell the story. So Sembene was using both. That's why in Sembene's works, you can count the dialogue lines. Most of the time is quiet moments, soundtrack, moving, and dialogue is always very limited and calculated. That's what should happen in a film, not just blah, 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 blah all the time. Because if you blah, blah, this is sound. But you are also showing picture. So the person watching is trying to digest the picture and your blah, blah. So try and tell your story using picture. I have looked at works that come from South Africa in my jury work. We don't have sound, don't have any dialogue. And they make sense. Some are just minds. South Africans make wonderful films. So what we should strive is to really up our skill. After we have upped our skill, then we can look for funding to make those films. But we need to up our scale. We need to. I have seen films made in Africa, around Africa. I have judged films making around Africa. And I know that the first African country, the best African country that makes films is South Africa. They are ahead of us. Nollywood is coming to the level of South Africa. But because South Africa is also a location for most international filmmakers who go there to make their films. So they have absolute sets. One of the best sets in the world is in South Africa for Hollywood filmmakers.
And even I would like to share with you that another country that makes excellent films is Liberia. Mm-hmm. You may check out the Liberian filmmakers in the diaspora. They make films that you want to watch over and over and over.
I'll check it out. I know I have not seen many Liberian entries in the African Magic Viewers Choice Award that I judge, but certainly I will look out for it. We have an association actually for development of cinema in Africa. We have it. So we intend to have a member of the association in each country in Africa. And the idea is to come together so we can get the funding to train trainable people in the different aspects of filmmaker, the different sectors. So we need to have our crew become specialized. You can have the best sound engineer from Liberia. You have one of the best cinematographers, DOPs from Nigeria, and you have one of the best editors from Rwanda. So this is what we are trying to do. So when you have a film, we come together, and the best people come together and take part in your film, in your crew. All you need to do is, and then you have the casting directors. You know, so we'll have cast that will be international cast that will be put together to do the job. You know, I have tried doing that with Nigerian filmmakers in Gambia during Yahya Jammeh's time. I have tried doing that as well with Pinewood in UK, who wanted to make come to Gambia, put up a studio, just like a set. And when they want to shoot some scenes, they fly all the way from UK, 6 hours, shoot the film, bring the actors, shoot the scenes they want to shoot, and the actors fly away the next day. It's cheaper for them to have it in UK than to do it in Gambia. But one thing was missing, which they said we must have in the Gambia, which is a film policy. this country does not have a film policy. So you cannot have Pinewood come into this country with their investment in a country where they don't have film policy. So you don't know what is allowed, what is not allowed, what can be done, what can't be done. So I went to the ministry, to the NCAC actually first, and I said, look, Mr. Director, tell your ministry that you need to have a film policy in this country if you want filmmakers to come here and make films. Because our country is a tourist country, and most tourist countries are also locations for filmmaking. But it doesn't exist. So we have a long way to go.
Certainly.
Go on.
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Wage, we have a long way to go, and I'm very, very thrilled with the expertise that I have had during this course of this discussion, and I hope the government is listening, and I hope not in the too distant future, the government should do something like the Nigerian government or South Africa or Liberia, because we really have to we've come a long way, and doings like you, Mariama, and to name the fledgling filmmakers in the country, we really need to have something that we can actually lean on. It's high time we got there, but unfortunately we are not yet there. So
thank you very much.
I really thank you for the expertise on this program, and we hope you will continue to follow us in our subsequent programs.